Thanks for joining us. We had two big USDA reports out this morning. We want to talk about both of them. One is the March 1 grain stocks, and then we also had the Prospective Plantings report, which was the big one. Looking at the March 1 stocks, which I think was the boring report today because we have lots of grain, and I think we kind of knew that already.
Yeah, we kind of did know that, and it was just a matter of how much more were we going to see. And right now, the early estimates had corn at, I believe, 5-year highs, and wheat and soybeans at 2 and 3-year highs. So we were looking at it quite a bit more stocks than what we've been seeing in the past few years. But it did come out to be, neutral to maybe a little bit negative. But you're right, it was the one that was completely ignored by the trade. Pretty much everybody focused more on what's going on with the planted acres report. But for the corn number, it came in a little less than anticipated, about 80 million less than thought. We did see a little bit more soybeans than we anticipated, and quite a little bit more than wheat at 43 million bushels. It'll be interesting to see what USDA does with their supply and demand numbers to compensate for this change. It's likely we'll see exports increase for corn. I don't think they'll change anything in soybeans, but for wheat, we might see some adjustments to some of those numbers.
Like I said, we have some charts in here. It was all pretty boring. I don't think anything you want to talk about through all this stuff.
Not really. I mean, the big thing is when guys look through this, look at where the stocks are, whether they're on farm or whether they're, in on commercial storage. And that really will tell you just, basically where the grain is and how hard it's going to be to get it to move through the channels.
On to the more exciting report. This was the Prospective Plantings report, what USDA is estimating we are going to plant this spring. First thing, principal crop acres are going to be down 6.3 million from last year. I don't think either one of us have had time to dig into where those acres are going, but
no, not really. But I mean, and that's quite interesting to see that because, it's taken us a few years to get back up to that 319 level. I mean, we thought we'd see it a couple of years ago. Now, all of a sudden, we're seeing that big drop. And it's not because of prevent plant acres, because right now, pretty much most are expected to get, most of the acres are expected to get planted. So to see the principal crops down to 313 was quite a shock, I think. And I think that surprised the trade.
Looking at corn and soybeans, everyone thought, we would have higher soybean acres, lower corn acres. We did. Do you expect corn to be that low, though?
Well, I didn't expect it, but I was hoping, because it's certainly what corn needs to see happen as far as 2024 is concerned. We need to cut our production because of the bigger stocks that we're looking at. So to see that, I mean, getting it close to 90 million is certainly friendly for corn, and it means that corn has to see a little bit more risk premium come back into play, because now all of a sudden we're going to need pretty much most of those acres get planted and actually yield fairly decent. So that 4.6 million decrease was quite a bit more than what we were anticipating on the corn side.
On the soybean side, the acres came in pretty much right where the trade expected them, but they were lower than the February Ag Outlook Farms numbers.
They were, by quite a bit too. So, I mean, that was interesting that we aren't seeing as much planted of soybeans than anticipated. When you look at, where we saw the changes, just about all of the major corn region or all the Corn Belt states reduced their corn acres, increased their soybeans, but not to as big of a degree as we expected. There's going to be a lot more specialty crops, especially when you look at the fringe regions.
As for wheat, we got all wheat acres down about 2 million from last year. Anything stick out for you here?
Yeah, a couple of things there. You look at the spring wheat number. I was a little disappointed that we actually are seeing an increase in other spring wheat, by about 135,000. I was expecting that we were going to see spring wheat acres drop because of wheat's inability to actually try to convince somebody to plant the crop. I was not surprised to see the durum acres were increased by that 352,000 from last year. So with the durum prices a little bit higher and with the revenue prices being a little stronger, I expected that we would see an increase in the durum numbers. But I am also surprised that we did see the winter wheat acres drop as much as they were, especially after seeing the January report show that we weren't looking at that big of a cut.
Now we're kind of go through these crop by crop. Principal acres, North Dakota there, number 3 in principal acres in the country. And that also does list all the principal crops in that blue section too. And here was where we are for acres. Like you said, we thought we were going to get closer to the 320, and instead we backed off.
Which, I mean, like I said, that's a little bit of a surprise because we've been gaining back our acres, less prevent plant. And we finally had gotten back to that 319 level, where we've been at, the previous 4 years of the chart. So it's kind of interesting to see now we're back down below where we were even in 2021.
And again, principal crops planted lower pretty much everywhere in the US except farther out west where they don't have a ton of acres. But looking at corn, the 5 big states there, Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska, Minnesota, South Dakota, all seeing lower acres. And there is the nationwide, a lot of red on that map.
A lot of red on that map. And, in the heart of the region, and I don't know if this is just because, a lot of guys are looking at less corn on corn acres, or if they're just looking at the real, economics of planting corn and how negative or how small the potential was. And that's forced a lot of them to cut out. But you can see the dark red certainly is where the bigger cuts are coming into play. And that's where the corn is being planted right now.
Going back to acre-wise, again, we had that nice big spike last year. We're dropping off that, going kind of back to where we were in 2022.
And hopefully that means that we are going to be looking at a little tighter supply. So that certainly will help the corn situation out a little bit.
Looking at soybeans, the complete opposite here. We have the 5 biggest states all increasing their acres. Again, bump from increase from last year, and the opposite. We got lots of blue, lots of increases over last year.
And you can see some of the darker blue, North Dakota being one of them, increasing acres by over 11%. Seeing Oklahoma also increase acres quite a bit. Surprising to see Texas drop that. And I was looking at, maybe cotton seeing a little bit of an increase there, but it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. But we are seeing a lot of producers go more towards beans, which I think some of the renewable fuel side of things is helping to encourage that.
And then if we put corn and soybean acreage together, North Dakota is going to see an increase, but there's a lot of Midwestern states there that are going to have less corn and soybean acres together.
And that's really interesting when you look at where the red is in that map, and you look at Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Wisconsin, southern Minnesota. That's the Corn Belt, and we're going to see less corn and soybeans planted in the Corn Belt. That really speaks a lot of volumes.
Looking at the winter wheat, we've seen some winter wheat numbers before. Like you said, in January, we saw some, but they've gone down again now since then.
They have, and and that's been kind of interesting. You figure by the time you get the crop planted, it's going to stay planted. But I think this tells us that there's maybe going to be a little bit more abandonment this year. Maybe some was grazed out, a little more was grazed out, and actually went to guys are going to abandon. So looking at putting in some other spring crops. So that it's a little friendly to the winter wheat crop, and the market actually performed that way.
And again, when you look at compared to last year, pretty much except for Montana and Washington, there everyone's in the red.
And again, a lot of it, you look at the deep red in the Delta areas, that's more of the soft red winter wheat areas. The hard red is down in the Southern Plains, and you've got the white wheat that comes out of the Pacific Northwest. So, but all classes virtually, other than, like you said, the Pacific Northwest, all seeing reductions.
Moving on to spring wheat. North Dakota is the biggest spring wheat producer. I went back and looked at last year. Last year, we had 49% of the spring wheat acres. This year, we're at 47%. So even though we dropped and Montana and South Dakota went up, we're still by far the leader in spring wheat.
And seeing almost a 5% reduction in North Dakota, I can believe that with a lot of guys that were kind of frustrated with wheat last year, and also because of a little bit of the drought situation. But seeing Minnesota and South Dakota increase their acres like they did was really a surprise, as they're traditionally not wheat producing regions.
And again, there's where we sit with acres. Then where we sit for the main growing states of that. Moving on to Durham, we're seeing increase in Durham acres there. Quite a big increase when you look at it on this chart.
the chart really does say a lot there when you see that big of an increase, almost 400,000. And, again, the economics kind of point to that region to see Durham do that. We're seeing Canada reduce some of their acres. So it stands to reason we're seeing a little of increase in the North Dakota primarily, and also in California. It'll be interesting to see how that turns out if guys really do get it planted.
And again, not very many Durham states out there, so. Moving on, some of the other crops, barley acres are down quite a bit. Did you expect that?
I expected to see barley acres down, mainly because of the contracts and guys seeing a little less enthusiasm from maltsters and the pet food industry to buy barley, and a lot of producers having to still hold last year. So I wasn't surprised to see barley acres down. I was surprised to see canola acres not up as much.
Yeah. Edible beans, those are up about 11.5%. That you were expecting, though.
Edible beans, we were expecting to see an increase. They had some really attractive contracts that were being offered, so we figured there was going to be a big increase in the edible bean market, or the edible bean crop. Almost 12%. That's a big increase. Now, if that holds true, it's likely that market could be in a little bit of trouble for pricing as you go into the fall. Next slide.
This one. Oats is really the only one on here that really affects us too much, down 9%.
And a little bit on the flax. There's a little bit more flax raised up in the north central part of the state. That's down 41%. That's big. Interesting to see that, even though we're looking at principal crops, they see a big reduction. Even hay is seeing a little bit of a reduction here, as that's one of the bigger crops raised in the U.S.
And then on this one, we have got sunflowers. Sunflowers down 27% from last year. Looking more in depth at those numbers, if those are realized, it would be the lowest nationwide planted acres of sunflowers since 1976. North Dakota acres expect to be down 23%. That would be the third lowest since 1974. North Dakota is going to see a 30% drop in the oil acres, but their confection acres are going to go up 20% from last year.
Which, right now, the confections mainly, most of those are done on contracts, and the oil sunflowers, because of, the pricing dropping and the inability to move the product, we've seen a pretty big drop in price. And that, I think, is what's causing a lot of producers to kind of walk away from that sunflower market.
And that was in the stocks number too. Sunflower stocks were up 22% from last year. And then kind of sum everything up, this is actually acre totals. Again, no surprise there. Corn, soybeans, hay, wheat are the major crops. But when you look at the percent change from last year, Durham, chickpeas, dry beans, those are the big winners in acres. Losers are sunflowers, barley, and then tobacco, sorghum, oats, winter wheat.
Surprised that sorghum is seeing a little bit of a drop down there. I figured that crop would see a little bit of an increase down in the southern plains. And that kind of leads to with the winter wheat side of things and with cotton. So I am surprised that sorghum is seeing 11% drop.
And that is all we have. Anything else you want to add, Randy?
No, now we got these two big reports out of the way. These numbers will go into the S&D numbers, so we'll kind of see what they look like as far as what's potential for our stocks estimates with these new acreages coming into play. So now the market has got this behind it. Now we're going to start focusing on weather. Once we come back, it's going to be April 1, and we'll start seeing crop progress reports, and we'll start seeing a little bit more as far as Plant 24 is concerned.
That's all we've got. Thank you for watching. If you've got any questions, you know where to find us. Have a good weekend.